had built his fortune from nothing. At 42 years old, he stood at the helm of a technology empire worth billions, his name whispered in boardrooms across 3 continents. His penthouse in Manhattan overlooked Central Park, a glass and steel monument to his success. But money, he had learned, could not buy everything. It could not bring back his wife, Caroline, who had died 3 years ago in a car accident that still haunted his dreams. It could not erase the guilt he felt for being at a business meeting in Tokyo when she took her last breath, and it certainly could not fill the void in his daughter's eyes. 7-year-old Emma had her mother's auburn hair and delicate features, but the spark that once animated her face had dimmed to almost nothing. She barely spoke anymore, communicating mostly in nods and shakes of her head. The parade of nannies hired never lasted more than a few months. Emma would retreat into herself, and the frustrated caretakers would give their notices, citing the child as difficult or unresponsive. Threw himself deeper into his work, telling himself he was securing Emma's future, even as he missed her present. The day everything changed began like any other, was scheduled to fly to Singapore for a crucial merger negotiation. His assistant had arranged for yet another nanny, the 7th in 18 months. This one came from an agency that specialized in challenging cases, though bristled at his daughter being labeled as such. He left before dawn, kissing Emma's forehead as she slept, promising himself he would make it up to her when he returned. But the merger hit unexpected complications. What should have been a 3-day trip stretched into 12. Negotiated through video calls and conference rooms, his mind always partly on Emma back home. He called every evening, but Emma rarely spoke, and the new nanny's reports were professionally vague. On the 12th day, exhausted and frustrated, made a decision that surprised even himself. He walked out of the final negotiation session, leaving his team to handle the details, and booked the next flight home. The private car dropped him at his building just after 7 in the evening. The doorman greeted him with surprise, nodding that Mr. wasn't expected until the weekend. Barely acknowledged him, too eager to see Emma, to make sure she was all right, to try once again to reach through the wall that had grown between them since Caroline's death. He stepped out of the elevator directly into his penthouse foyer. The apartment was quiet, too quiet for a home with a 7-year-old child. Set down his briefcase and walked through the vast living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the glittering Manhattan skyline. No one was there. He checked the playroom, Emma's favorite space that Caroline had designed, filled with books and art supplies and a piano Emma no longer touched. Empty. A sound drew his attention toward the back of the apartment, toward the kitchen and staff quarters. It was laughter, bright and genuine, a sound he hadn't heard in his home for 3 years. Emma's laughter, felt his heart constrict. He moved quickly, almost running, following the sound that had become foreign to his ears. The kitchen was a chef's dream, all marble and stainless steel, with a large island in the center and a deep farmhouse sink by the window. As reached the doorway, he froze at the scene before him. Emma was sitting in the kitchen sink, her legs dangling over the edge, her feet bare. She was covered in flour, white powder dusting her hair, her clothes, even her eyelashes. She was laughing, really laughing, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her. And standing at the sink, sleeves rolled up, also covered in flour, was a woman had never seen before. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with dark skin and natural hair pulled back in a loose bun. She wore simple clothes, jeans, and a white t-shirt now marked with handprints of flour. She was beautiful in an understated way, but what struck most was her smile, warm and genuine, as she looked at Emma with such tenderness, it made his chest ache. "Now remember," the woman was saying, her voice melodic with a slight accent couldn't quite place, "when your mama made these cookies, she always said you had to mix with love. The dough can feel it if you're rushing or angry, so we mix slow and we think happy thoughts." Emma nodded seriously, her small hands plunged into a bowl of cookie dough. "I'm thinking about Mama," she said, her voice clear and strong, not the whisper had grown accustomed to. "Is that a happy thought?" The woman's expression softened. "The happiest, sweet girl, your mama would be so proud seeing you bake her special recipe." Must have made a sound because both heads turned toward him. Emma's eyes went wide. "Daddy!" She scrambled in the sink, and the woman quickly lifted her out, setting her gently on the floor. Emma ran to him, leaving floury footprints on the pristine tile, and caught her up in his arms, not caring about his expensive suit. "Baby girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you're laughing." "Grace taught me Mama's cookie recipe," Emma said, pulling back to look at him with more animation than he'd seen in years. She knew Mama. Did you know that? She worked at the big house before Mama got sick, but I was too little to remember. Looked over Emma's head at the woman, Grace, who was wiping flour from her hands with a dish towel, looking uncertain. Mister, she said quietly, I'm sorry for the mess. I can explain. But couldn't speak. His mind was reeling. The agency had sent a nanny, a replacement for the one who had quit via email 4 days ago. He hadn't even asked for details, trusting his assistant to handle it. And now this woman, this stranger, had somehow reached Emma in a way no one else had managed. Why is she in the sink? Heard himself ask, the words coming out harsher than he intended. Grace straightened, meeting his eyes. There was no fear there, only calm dignity. I should have asked permission first, mister, but Emma was having a hard evening. She missed you. I remembered that Caroline used to lift her into the sink when they baked together. It was their special thing. I thought maybe it would comfort her to remember. She paused, then added softly, and it did. Set Emma down gently. His daughter's eyes were moving between him and Grace with worry creasing her small forehead. Daddy, please don't be mad at Grace. She's the best. She knows all Mama's stories. She tells me about when Mama was young before she even met you. And she doesn't get sad when I talk about Mama. Everyone else gets sad and changes the subject, but Grace listens. The words hit like a physical blow. How had he not known? How had he missed that Emma needed to talk about Caroline, that she was being silenced by well-meaning people who thought they were helping her move on? I'm not mad, managed, though his voice was rough. He looked at Grace again, really looked at her. You knew my wife. Grace nodded. I worked at your estate in Connecticut for 2 years before Mrs. became ill. I was on the housekeeping staff. Caroline was kind to everyone, but especially to me. When I told her I was studying for my nursing degree, she helped me with my tuition. She said I reminded her of herself when she was younger and trying to make her way. A sad smile crossed Grace's face. After she passed, I finished my degree. I've been working as a pediatric nurse. But when I heard through Mrs. at the agency that the family needed help, I had to try. I wanted to honor Caroline's kindness by helping her daughter. Felt the room tilt slightly. Mrs. ran the last agency he'd used, the one specializing in difficult cases. He'd never bothered to read the files, just trusted that someone qualified would show up. You're a nurse. Certified pediatric nurse, Grace confirmed. I know I was sent as a nanny, and I understand if you want to terminate my employment immediately. Sitting Emma in the sink without permission was unprofessional. But mister, your daughter is not difficult. She's grieving. She's been grieving alone because everyone around her is too scared to say her mother's name. She needs to remember Caroline, to celebrate her, not to forget. Emma had pressed herself against side, and he felt her small body tense with worry. Daddy, please, she whispered, please let Grace stay. Looked down at his daughter, at the flower in her hair and the hope in her eyes, and then at the woman who had somehow performed a miracle in his kitchen. His carefully controlled world was cracking, and instead of fear, he felt something else. Relief, perhaps, or possibility. The cookies, he said finally, are they Caroline's recipe? Grace nodded. Chocolate chip with sea salt, her specialty. Then we should finish them, said, surprising himself. Emma, show me what you've learned. Emma's face lit up like the sun breaking through clouds. She grabbed his hand, tugging him toward the sink. You have to take off your jacket and tie, Daddy, and roll up your sleeves. Grace says you can't bake properly if you're worried about getting messy. As shrugged off his jacket and loosened his tie, he caught Grace's eye. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between approval and caution. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary and felt a jolt of something he hadn't felt in years. Not just attraction, though there was that, but connection, understanding. Mr. Grace said, her voice professional again, I should mention that Emma hasn't eaten dinner yet. I thought the baking would encourage her appetite. There's a casserole in the oven almost ready. After the cookies are done, she'll need a bath and bed. Her routine has been consistent since I arrived. How long have you been here? Asked, rolling up his sleeves. 5 days, Grace answered. I was hired as a temporary placement while the agency searched for someone more permanent. 5 days, repeated, looking at Emma, who was happily pressing dough balls onto a baking sheet with her small hands. 5 days, and this woman had accomplished what no one else had in 3 years. And in those 5 days, you got her to talk about Caroline. And to laugh, Emma added, grinning at him. Grace makes funny voices when she tells stories. She does Mama's voice really good. It's like Mama's here again just for a little bit. Felt his throat tighten. he himself with the cookie dough, following Emma's enthusiastic instructions. Grace moved around them efficiently, wiping up flour, checking the casserole, maintaining a respectful distance but always there, always attentive. As they worked, Emma chattered in a way had forgotten she could. She told him about the other things Grace had taught her, about the songs they'd sung, about the photo album Grace had helped her create with pictures of Caroline. Grace says it's important to remember the happy times, not just the sad ones. She says Mama would want us to smile when we think of her. Grace is right, said, his voice barely above a whisper. He glanced at the woman who had somehow known exactly what his daughter needed, what he had been too grief-stricken and busy to see. Grace met his eyes again, and this time something passed between them. An acknowledgement, a beginning of understanding. Realized with startling clarity that this woman, this stranger who wasn't really a stranger at all, had just changed everything. The cookies went into the oven, filling the kitchen with the warm scent of chocolate and vanilla. Emma insisted on staying to watch them bake, pressing her nose against the oven window. Grace moved to the sink to wash the mixing bowls and found himself standing beside her, drying the dishes she handed him. "Thank you," he said quietly so Emma wouldn't hear, "for seeing what I missed, for knowing what she needed." Grace paused, her hands in the soapy water. "Emma is a beautiful soul, mister. She just needed permission to remember her mother. Children often think they need to be strong for the adults around them. She needed someone to tell her it was okay to miss Caroline, to talk about her, to keep her alive in her heart." "And you did that," said, "in 5 days." Grace handed him a bowl, avoiding his gaze. "I loved Caroline. She was good to me when she didn't have to be. This is the least I can do." Wanted to say more, to ask more, but Emma called out that the cookies were ready. The next hour passed in a blur of warm cookies, casserole eaten at the kitchen island instead of the formal dining room, and Emma's constant stream of conversation. She told about her week with Grace, about the park where they'd fed the ducks, about the library where Grace had helped her check out books about stars because Caroline had loved astronomy. Every story, every detail showed how much he had missed, how much he had failed to see. But instead of drowning in guilt, he felt grateful. Grateful that this woman had appeared, had cared, had seen his daughter when he had been too blind with his own grief. When Emma finally yawned, Grace stood. "Bath time, sweet girl, then bed." Emma surprised by taking both his and Grace's hands. "Will you both do bedtime?" she asked, her voice small and hopeful. "Together." Grace looked too, deferring to him. He nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. They made their way to Emma's room, a princess palace that Caroline had decorated in shades of purple and silver. While Grace ran the bath, sat on Emma's bed, looking at the photo album Grace had mentioned. Every page showed Caroline's bright smile, and Emma had decorated the borders with stickers and drawings. On the last page, Emma had written in careful letters, "My mama. She was beautiful and kind, and I will never forget her." Grace appeared in the doorway. "She's ready for you to say good night." Went into the bathroom, where Emma sat in the tub surrounded by bubbles. They talked while she splashed, really talked about small things and big things, about Caroline and about Emma's day. When she was clean and in her pajamas, carried her to bed, tucking her in as Grace stood nearby. "Will you tell me Mama's story?" Emma asked. "The one about the stars." Grace sat on the edge of the bed and began to speak in that melodic voice, telling the story of how Caroline had loved to stargaze, how she had known all the constellations, how she had believed that the people we love become stars watching over us. Emma's eyes grew heavy, and by the end of the story, she was asleep. And Grace stood together in the darkened room, watching Emma breathe peacefully. Then Grace moved toward the door and followed her out, closing the door softly behind them. In the hallway, reality reasserted itself. Grace was the nanny, temporary at that, was her employer, but the lines felt blurred, the boundaries unclear. "Mr. Grace began, her voice low, "I apologize again for overstepping today. I should have maintained professional boundaries. I shouldn't have told Emma those stories without your permission. I shouldn't have used Caroline's memories without asking you first." Shook his head. "Don't apologize for giving me back my daughter. Don't apologize for doing what I should have been doing all along." He paused, struggling with words that didn't come easily. "I've been running from Caroline's death. I thought if I worked enough, stayed busy enough, I could outrun the pain, but all I did was abandon Emma to her grief." "You didn't abandon her," Grace said gently. "You were drowning in your own pain. We all grieve differently. There's no right or wrong way." But there are better ways, countered. Your way, talking about her, celebrating her, keeping her alive in memory instead of treating her name like poison. He looked at Grace, really looked at her, seeing not just an employee, but a woman of depth and compassion. I want to hire you permanently, not as a temporary nanny, but as Emma's caregiver, a nurse and companion, whatever title works. Name your price. Grace was quiet for a long moment. Mister, I appreciate the offer, but I need you to understand something. Emma doesn't need just a caregiver. She needs her father. I can help. I can be there during the day, but you need to be present, really present. Not just physically in the apartment, but emotionally available to her. The words were direct, almost harsh, but heard the truth in them. You're right, he said. And I will be, I promise you, and I promise Emma, but I need help. I need someone who understands what she needs, what Caroline would want for her. I need you. The way he said those last 3 words surprised them both. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something neither was ready to name. Grace stepped back slightly, professional distance reasserting itself. I'll stay, she said finally. On one condition, you join us. When I do activities with Emma, when we talk about Caroline, when we have dinner, you need to be part of this family again, not just its provider. Nodded, relief washing over him. Deal. He held out his hand and Grace took it. Her hand was warm and strong and held it a moment longer than necessary. As Grace to her quarters off the kitchen, stood in the hallway, his mind spinning. In one evening, his carefully constructed world had shifted. His daughter was talking again, laughing again, and a woman he barely knew had shown him what he'd been missing, had forced him to see his failures as a father. But there was something else, something he wasn't ready to examine too closely. The way Grace's eyes lit when she smiled, the tenderness in her voice when she spoke about Caroline, the jolt of awareness he felt every time their eyes met. Walked to his study and sat in the leather chair behind his massive desk. The city glittered below him, millions of lights representing millions of lives. Caroline had loved this view. She'd often brought her tea to this room, sitting on the sofa and reading while worked, happy just to be near him. He hadn't been able to enter this room without her presence overwhelming him. But tonight, with Emma's laughter still echoing in his ears and the scent of Caroline's cookies still in the air, the grief felt different. Not gone, never gone, but transformed into something bearable, something that could coexist with joy and possibility. Pulled out his phone and sent a message to his assistant, informing him that he would be working from home for the foreseeable future. There were no negotiations important enough to pull him away from Emma. Not anymore. Then he opened his laptop and began to research. He looked up Grace's credentials, confirming her nursing degree, her certifications, her references. Everything checked out. She was exactly who she claimed to be, but what struck him most was a note in her file from Mrs. at the agency. Grace specifically requested the placement, said she owed Caroline a debt of gratitude and wanted to help the family. Rare to see such loyalty in this industry. Leaned back in his chair, his mind on the woman sleeping in the staff quarters. She had come to them not for money or career advancement, but out of love and loyalty for a woman who had been kind to her. How many people in this world operated from such pure motives? The night deepened around him and finally made his way to his bedroom. As he passed Emma's room, he looked in on her. She was sleeping peacefully, clutching a stuffed rabbit Caroline had given her on her 5th birthday. For 3 years, that rabbit had sat untouched on a shelf, too painful a reminder. Now it was back in Emma's arms where it belonged. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his bedroom, waking him earlier than usual. For the first time in 3 years, he hadn't dreamed of the accident. Instead, his sleep had been filled with images of Emma's laughter and Grace's gentle smile. He lay there for a moment, listening to the sounds of his home coming alive. From somewhere in the apartment, he could hear Emma's voice, bright and animated, singing a song he didn't recognize. Got up quickly, showering and dressing in casual clothes instead of his usual business attire. If he was going to be present, truly present, he needed to start now. He found Emma and Grace in the breakfast nook, a sun-filled corner of the kitchen that overlooked the park. Emma was helping Grace make pancakes, standing on a step stool at the counter, carefully pouring batter onto the griddle. Both were laughing at Emma's attempt to make a pancake in the shape of a star. Daddy, Emma spotted him first, her face lighting up. Look, Grace is teaching me to make pancakes, Mama's recipe, but we're making fun shapes. Joined them, accepting the coffee Grace poured for him with a nod of thanks. That's quite a star, he said, examining Emma's lopsided creation with exaggerated seriousness. Very avant-garde. Emma giggled. What does that mean? It means unique and creative, Grace explained, flipping a more traditionally round pancake onto a plate. Your daddy is saying your star is one of a kind. Just like Mama used to say, Emma replied, her smile dimming only slightly at the mention of Caroline. But then Grace squeezed her shoulder gently and Emma brightened again. Can Daddy have the star pancake? I would be honored, said, settling onto one of the bar stools. He watched Grace move around the kitchen with easy efficiency, noticed how naturally Emma gravitated toward her, how the woman seemed to know exactly when Emma needed encouragement and when she needed space. Breakfast was a revelation. Emma talked nonstop, telling about her plans for the day. Grace had promised to take her to the art museum to see a special exhibit on Impressionism that Caroline had loved. Then they would go to the park, maybe feed the ducks again, and come home to work on a project Emma was creating about her mother's life. Can Daddy come? Emma asked suddenly, looking between Grace and with hope shining in her eyes. To the museum. Grace met's gaze over Emma's head, a silent question in her expression. Realized she was giving him an out, a way to decline gracefully. But he thought of his promise from the night before, of the years he'd lost to grief and work. I would love to, he said and meant it. I haven't been to that museum in years. Your mother and I went there on one of our first dates. Emma's eyes went wide. Really? Tell me the story. So did, speaking past the lump in his throat about the young Caroline, how she'd dragged him to the museum on a Saturday afternoon, how she'd spent an hour in front of a single painting, explaining the use of light and color with such passion that, who knew nothing about art, had fallen even deeper in love with her. Grace listened while she cleaned up the breakfast dishes, her expression soft, and wondered what she was thinking. The museum trip was something would remember for the rest of his life. Emma held his hand as they walked through the galleries, Grace slightly behind them, letting them have their father-daughter moment, but always there, always attentive. Emma stopped in front of the same painting Caroline had loved and felt his breath catch. Mama told Grace about this painting, Emma said quietly, looking up at the water lilies suspended in time and paint. She said it reminded her that beautiful things can grow in still water, that you don't always need rushing streams and excitement to make something lovely. Looked at Grace, who was standing a respectful distance away, giving them space. Caroline told you that. Grace nodded, moving closer. She was going through her diagnosis at the time, the treatments. She said she felt like still water, not moving forward or back, just existing, but she wanted to be like the lilies to find beauty in that stillness. Grace's voice was thick with emotion. She was the strongest person I've ever known. Felt tears threaten, but for once he didn't push them down. She was, he agreed. Then to Emma, your mother was right, and you know what? You're like those lilies too, beautiful and strong, growing in your own time, in your own way. Emma leaned against him and wrapped his arm around her small shoulders. The three of them stood there together, looking at the painting that had meant so much to Caroline, and felt something shift inside him. The grief was still there, but it was no longer suffocating. It was part of him, woven into his love for Caroline, his love for Emma, and something else he wasn't ready to name. After the museum, they went to the park. Emma ran ahead to the duck pond, her laughter carrying back to where and Grace walked together. The autumn air was crisp, leaves crunching under their feet, and found himself acutely aware of the woman beside him. Thank you for today, he said. For every day, really. I don't know how you've done this, how you've reached Emma when no one else could. Grace was quiet for a moment, watching Emma throw bread to the ducks. I didn't do anything special, mister. I just listened to her, really listened, and I gave her permission to love her mother out loud. He said, please call me, Mr. is too formal for someone who's become so important to my daughter. He paused, and to me. Grace glanced at him, surprise flickering across her face. I'm still your employee. You're more than that, said, then stopped, realizing how that sounded. I mean, you're Emma's caregiver, her nurse, her friend. You're not just staff, you're family. The word hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to unpack. Grace looked away first, calling out to Emma to not get too close to the water's edge. Watched her profile, the curve of her cheek, the way the sunlight caught in her dark hair, and felt that pull again, stronger this time. They spent the afternoon in comfortable companionship, the three of them forming an easy unit that felt both strange and natural. Couldn't remember the last time he'd spent an entire day not thinking about work, not checking his phone every few minutes, not mentally running through deal points and negotiations. Emma held both their hands as they walked back to the building, swinging between them, giggling when they lifted her off the ground. In the elevator, Emma leaned against Grace, drowsy from the fresh air and excitement. Found himself studying them, this woman and his daughter, and feeling a fierce protectiveness for both of them. When had that happened? When had Grace gone from being an employee to someone he wanted to protect, to keep safe, to keep close? That evening, after Emma was bathed and tucked into bed with another story about Caroline's stargazing adventures, found Grace in the kitchen. She was preparing tomorrow's meals, her movements efficient and practiced. Poured himself a glass of wine and offered her one, which she accepted with a small smile. "I've been thinking," began, leaning against the counter, "about what you said last night, about being present for Emma. You were right. I've been absent even when I was here, but I want to change that." Grace nodded, sipping her wine. "She needs you. I can provide care and companionship, but you're her father. Nothing replaces that." "I'm going to cut back on travel," continued. "My assistant nearly had a heart attack when I told him, but there's no negotiation more important than being here for Emma. I'll work from home most days, take virtual meetings when possible." "That's wonderful," Grace said, genuine warmth in her voice. "Emma will be so happy." "And I want to learn," added, "about Caroline, about the stories you've been telling Emma. I realized today that I've been so wrapped up in my own grief that I forgot Emma has her own memories of Caroline different from mine. I want to hear them all." Grace set down her wine glass, her expression thoughtful. "Caroline used to talk about you all the time," she said softly. "When I worked at the Connecticut house, she was so proud of you, of what you'd built. But she also worried that you worked too much, that you were going to burn yourself out. She said you had a tendency to try to solve everything with money and deals, when sometimes what people needed was just your time and attention." Felt the observation hit home. She was right, she usually was. "She loved you completely," Grace continued. "That was obvious to everyone who saw you together. The way she lit up when you came home, even if you'd only been gone a few hours. The way she talked about your first date, your proposal, the day Emma was born. She kept every love letter you ever wrote her in a special box. I know because I helped her organize the study once, and she showed them to me. She said those letters got her through the hard days of her treatment." His throat tightened. "I didn't know she kept those. I thought she'd thrown them away. They were terrible, full of and awkward attempts at poetry." Grace smiled. "She said they were perfect because they were real, because they showed your heart, which you normally kept so guarded." She paused, then added quietly, "She wanted Emma to read them someday when she was older, to know how much her parents loved each other." "Where is this box?" asked, his voice rough. "In Caroline's closet, top shelf in a blue hat box. Emma and I found it last week. I told her she should ask you before we opened it." Was quiet for a long moment, emotions warring inside him. Finally, he said, "Let's open it together, the three of us, tomorrow evening after dinner. It's time." Grace's eyes shone with approval and something else, something that made his heart beat faster. "That's a beautiful idea. Caroline would love that you're sharing those memories with Emma." They talked late into the night, sitting at the kitchen island, the wine forgotten as Grace shared stories about Caroline that had never heard. Stories about Caroline's kindness to the staff, her wicked sense of humor, her terrible singing voice that she inflicted on everyone anyway. Contributed his own memories, finding that it didn't hurt as much to talk about Caroline when Grace was listening. Her presence somehow made the past feel less painful and more precious. It was past midnight when finally said goodnight, watching Grace disappear into her quarters. He stood in the hallway for a long moment, feeling unsettled and alive in a way he hadn't felt since Caroline's death. It was more than attraction, though there was definitely that. It was connection, understanding, a sense of being seen for who he really was, not just the billionaire, not just the grieving widower, but flawed, trying, sometimes failing, but always loving his daughter with everything he had. The next morning brought a new routine. Woke early and went for a run in Central Park, something he hadn't done in years. When he returned, Grace and Emma were already up, working on Emma's project about Caroline. Showered and joined them, offering to help with the poster board Emma was decorating. The days began to take shape around this new rhythm. Still worked, taking calls and video meetings from his home office, but he emerged regularly to check on Emma, to join them for lunch, to participate in whatever activity Grace had planned. He found himself looking forward to these interruptions, these moments of real life that had been absent for so long. Grace proved to be not just an excellent caregiver, but a natural teacher. She turned every outing into a learning opportunity, every activity into a chance for Emma to grow and explore. She taught Emma about art and music, about nature and science, always connecting the lessons back to Caroline somehow, keeping her memory alive in everything they did. Watched and learned, not just about Emma, but about himself. He learned that he could be patient, that he could play without constantly checking his phone, that he could listen without trying to immediately solve every problem Emma presented. Grace never lectured him, but her gentle example showed him a different way of being a father. 3 weeks passed in this new normal. Emma continued to blossom, talking more, laughing more, sleeping through the night without the nightmares that had plagued her. Felt himself changing too, softening, opening up in ways he'd forgotten were possible. It was inevitable that he would start to notice Grace in ways that had nothing to do with her role as Emma's caregiver. The way she hummed while she worked, old jazz standards that Caroline had loved. The way her face transformed when she smiled, beautiful, becoming radiant. The way she always seemed to know when he was struggling, appearing with a cup of coffee or a word of encouragement at exactly the right moment. Tried to ignore these feelings to maintain professional boundaries. Grace was an employee, someone who had come to help Emma out of loyalty to Caroline. Getting involved with her would be inappropriate, a betrayal of everything Caroline had meant to him. But the heart was learning, didn't always listen to logic. One evening, after Emma was asleep, found Grace on the terrace. She was standing at the railing, looking out at the city lights, wrapped in a cardigan against the autumn chill. Joined her, maintaining a careful distance. "Beautiful night," he said, immediately feeling foolish at the. Grace smiled without looking at him. "Caroline loved this view. She used to tell me about standing out here with you, dreaming about the future." "We had so many plans," said quietly. "Places we wanted to travel, things we wanted to do when Emma was older, a house in Tuscany, a summer place in Maine. It all seems pointless now without her." "It's not pointless," Grace said firmly, finally turning to look at him. "Those dreams show how much you loved each other, how much hope you had. That's beautiful, that's worth remembering." Noticed her use of his first name, the intimacy of it. "Grace," he began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. "I know," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "I feel it too, this pull between us. But we can't. I'm here for Emma, to honor Caroline's memory. Getting involved with you would complicate everything." "Would it?" asked, taking a step closer despite himself. "Or would it be the most natural thing in the world? Two people who loved Caroline, helping each other heal, building something new from the broken pieces." Grace shook her head but saw the conflict in her eyes. "I'm the help. You're one of the richest men in the country. What we're feeling, it's just proximity, gratitude maybe. You're grateful to me for helping Emma. I'm grateful to you for letting me be part of this family. It's not real." "Don't tell me what I feel," said, his voice sharper than he intended. "I'm not some teenager confused by hormones. I'm 42 years old. I know the difference between gratitude and this." He gestured between them at the charged space that seemed to crackle with unspoken feelings. Grace wrapped her arms around herself, looking away. "Even if what we're feeling is real, it's too soon. Caroline has only been gone 3 years. Emma is just starting to heal. The last thing she needs is to see her father with another woman, especially her caregiver. It would confuse her, maybe hurt her. Or maybe it would show her that it's possible to honor the past while still moving forward," countered. But even as he said it, he knew Grace was right. The timing was terrible. The situation was complicated, and yet his heart refused to listen to reason. They stood in silence for a long moment, the city humming below them, neither willing to close the distance between them or walk away. Finally, Grace spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need this job. I need to be here for Emma. If we cross this line, if we give in to whatever this is and it doesn't work out, I'll have to leave. And Emma will lose someone else she's come to depend on. I can't do that to her. I won't." Heard the resolution in her voice, saw the truth in her words. Grace was right. Emma had to come first. His feelings, Grace's feelings, none of that mattered as much as his daughter's. He took a step back, physically and emotionally. "You're right," he said, his voice heavy. "Emma's healing has to be our priority. I apologize for putting you in an uncomfortable position." "Don't apologize," Grace said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "Just know that if circumstances were different, if timing were different, maybe." She trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished, the possibility hanging in the air between them. Nodded, not trusting his voice. They stood on the terrace a moment longer, two people connected by grief and care for a little girl, by an impossible attraction neither could acknowledge, by a future neither could pursue. Then Grace said goodnight and went inside, leaving alone with the city lights and his complicated heart. The next morning, things were subtly different. Grace was professional, keeping a physical distance from that hadn't been there before. She was still warm with Emma, still the same caring presence, but there was a wall up, a boundary clearly marked. Respected it, matched it with his own formal behavior, and they moved through their days like dancers who knew all the steps but were determined not to touch. Emma noticed. Children always do. "Why are you and Grace acting weird?" she asked one afternoon while they worked on a puzzle together. Grace was across the room, preparing snacks, deliberately giving them space. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" asked, though he knew exactly what she meant. "You don't smile at each other anymore," Emma said, her small face serious. "You used to smile when you looked at Grace. Now you look sad. Did you have a fight?" Glanced at Grace, who had stilled, obviously listening. "No fight," he assured Emma. "Sometimes grown-ups just need some space, that's all." Emma frowned. "But I like it when you're both happy, when you're both here. It feels like—" She trailed off, struggling with words too big for her 7-year-old vocabulary. "Like what, baby?" prompted gently. "Like we're a family again," Emma finished, her voice small. "Not the same family as before because Mama's not here, but a new family, a different family. Is that bad? Am I being bad to Mama's memory?" Felt his heart break and heal simultaneously. He pulled Emma into his lap, holding her close. "You're not being bad at all. Mama would want us to be happy, to be a family in whatever way works for us. Love doesn't run out, Emma. Loving new people doesn't mean we love Mama any less." Grace had moved closer, her professional distance forgotten in the face of Emma's distress. She knelt beside them, taking Emma's small hand. "Your daddy's right," she said softly. "Caroline would want you both to be happy, to let love into your lives. She was the most generous person I knew. She wouldn't want her memory to become a wall that keeps joy out." Emma looked between them, her young face wise beyond her years. "Then why do you both look so sad when you think I'm not watching?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable. Met Grace's eyes over Emma's head, saw his own conflict reflected there. They were trying to protect Emma, but in doing so, they were teaching her that moving forward meant being sad, that honoring Caroline meant closing themselves off to new possibilities. "Sometimes adults make things more complicated than they need to be," said finally. "We think we're protecting the people we love, but really we're just afraid." He looked at Grace as he spoke, the words meant for both Emma and the woman kneeling beside them. "Of what?" Emma asked. "Of making mistakes," Grace answered, her eyes still locked with "of doing the wrong thing, of hurting people we care about." Emma processed this for a moment, then said with the simple clarity of childhood, "But Mama always said being afraid is okay. Acting afraid is okay. Not trying because you're afraid is what's bad." She looked at both of them. "You taught me that, Grace. You said Mama wouldn't want me to be afraid to talk about her. Why should you be afraid to be happy?" Out of the mouths of babes, thought. His 7-year-old daughter had just articulated what he and Grace had been dancing around for weeks. They were letting fear dictate their actions, hiding behind noble excuses about propriety and timing and what was best for Emma. But maybe Emma knew what was best for Emma better than they did. "You're very wise," Grace told Emma, her voice unsteady. "Your mama would be so proud of you." "Then will you stop being weird?" Emma asked hopefully. "Will you both be happy again? I like it when you're happy. The whole house feels better." Looked at Grace, raising his eyebrows in question. She bit her lip, clearly struggling, then slowly nodded. It wasn't a declaration of love or a promise of a future together. It was simply an agreement to stop hiding, to let themselves feel whatever they felt, to see where this connection might lead without letting fear paralyze them. "We'll try," promised Emma, pulling her close. "Right, Grace?" "Right," Grace agreed, and when she smiled at him, truly smiled for the first time in days, felt something lock into place inside his chest. Whatever this was, wherever it led, they would face it together, with Emma at the center, with Caroline's memory blessing them forward instead of holding them back. That evening they kept their promise from days earlier and opened Caroline's box of love letters. The three of them sat on Emma's bed, the blue hatbox between them, and read aloud the awkward, heartfelt words he'd written to Caroline over the years they'd been together. Grace and Emma listened, sometimes laughing at his terrible attempts at poetry, sometimes crying at the raw emotion in his words. "You loved Mama so much," Emma said, wonder in her voice. "I did," agreed. "I do. I always will." He looked at Grace. But your mama wouldn't want that love to be the last love I ever feel. She wouldn't want me to close my heart because she can't be here to claim it. Caroline believed in love in all its forms. She believed hearts could stretch to hold more than we think possible. Emma nodded solemnly, then surprised them both by taking hand and Grace's hand and joining them together. Then we should all stretch, she declared. Mama would like that. Felt Grace's fingers close around his, warm and strong. He met her eyes, saw acceptance there and possibility and hope. Tomorrow would bring complications, challenges, conversations they'd need to have about boundaries and expectations and what any of this meant. But tonight, sitting in Emma's room, holding the hand of a woman who had brought his daughter back to life and awakened something in his own long-dormant heart, felt at peace. Caroline's memory didn't fade but transformed, becoming a blessing on this new beginning, this unexpected chance at happiness that had walked through his door in the form of a woman with kind eyes. And a generous the weeks following that pivotal evening brought a tentative new rhythm to the household. Found himself navigating unfamiliar territory, balancing his growing feelings for Grace with his responsibility to Emma and his enduring love for Caroline's memory. Grace, for her part, remained professionally careful while allowing warmth to creep back into their interactions, no longer hiding behind walls of formality. Emma thrived in this environment. Her nightmares became rare, then stopped altogether. She started second grade with enthusiasm, making friends easily and excelling in her studies. Her teacher called to express amazement at the transformation, noting that the quiet, withdrawn child from last year had become confident and engaged. Credited Grace entirely, but Grace insisted it was renewed presence that had made the real difference. One Saturday morning in late October woke to find a note slipped under his door. It was from Grace, her handwriting elegant and precise. Emma asked if we could visit Caroline's grave today. I wanted to check with you first. If you'd rather go alone with her, I understand. Grace. Stared at the note for a long moment. He hadn't been to the cemetery since Caroline's funeral. The thought of it had been too painful, too final. But Emma asking meant she was ready, and if she was ready, then he needed to be too. He found Grace in the kitchen, preparing breakfast while Emma still slept. We'll go together, he said without preamble. All three of us, if you're comfortable with that. Grace looked up from the eggs she was scrambling, relief evident on her face. I'd like that. Emma needs both of us there. They drove to the cemetery in rarely used Range Rover, Emma chattering from the backseat about the flowers they'd picked up on the way, white roses that had been Caroline's favorite. Hands were tight on the steering wheel, and more than once he felt Grace's eyes on him, offering silent support. The cemetery was peaceful, rolling green hills dotted with trees in their autumn glory. Caroline's plot was in a quiet corner beneath a large oak tree. Her headstone was simple, elegant, just her name and dates and the words beloved wife and mother. Had chosen those words in a fog of grief, and now he wondered if they were enough to capture the vibrant, passionate woman she'd been. Emma approached the grave slowly, clutching her flowers, and Grace hung back, giving her space. They watched as Emma knelt down, carefully arranging the roses against the headstone. She was talking, her voice too low for them to hear, having what appeared to be an entire conversation with her mother. She does this at home sometimes, Grace said quietly. Talks to Caroline's picture, tells her about her day, asks her questions. I hope that's okay. More than okay, said, his voice rough. I should have known she needed this, needed to feel connected still. You're here now, Grace reminded him gently. That's what matters. Emma turned and beckoned them over, and Grace approached, standing on either side of Emma. Knelt down beside his daughter, running his fingers over Caroline's name carved in granite. I told Mama about you, Grace, Emma said, looking up at the woman who had become so important to her. I told her you're taking good care of us, just like she would want, and I told her about Daddy being home more and how we bake her cookies and tell her stories. I think she's happy about all of it. Grace's eyes were wet with tears. I think you're right, sweet girl. Found his voice, though it was thick with emotion. Your mama loved you so much, Emma. Every single day of your life you were her greatest joy. Nothing made her prouder than being your mother. And being your wife, Emma added, wise beyond her years. She looked between and Grace with an expression that seemed almost knowing. Mama wouldn't want you to be alone forever, Daddy. She told me once when she was sick that life was for living. She said that even when people we love go away, we have to keep finding reasons to smile. Felt his heart constrict. When did she tell you that? The day before she went to the hospital the last time, Emma said matter-of-factly. She said she might not come home and I needed to be brave. She said I needed to help you be brave too because you were going to be very sad. But she said sadness doesn't last forever if we don't let it. Emma looked at the headstone thoughtfully. I think we let it last too long, Daddy, but Grace helped us remember how to be brave again. Pulled Emma into his arms, holding her tight while tears he'd held back for 3 years finally fell. Grace knelt beside them, her hand resting on shoulder, and the three of them stayed there together, crying and healing and saying goodbye to the past so they could fully embrace the future. As they drove home, Emma fell asleep in the backseat, exhausted by the emotional visit, and Grace were quiet, comfortable in the silence. Finally, Grace spoke. I've been thinking about something, she said carefully. About my position here. Emma's doing so well now. She's sleeping through the night, making friends, thriving in school. Maybe it's time for me to step back to return to regular nursing work. You and Emma have found your rhythm. You don't need me here full-time anymore. Felt panic surge through him. Emma needs you, we need you. You need a part-time nanny at most, Grace countered gently. Someone to be here when you're working to help with homework and dinner. You don't need a full-time caregiver and nurse. Emma isn't the fragile child she was 2 months ago. This isn't about Emma, said, then stopped, realizing what he'd just admitted. He pulled the car over to the side of the road, putting it in park. He turned to face Grace, his heart hammering. Yes, Emma needs you, but I need you too. And before you say that's just gratitude or proximity or whatever else you want to call it, let me finish. Grace was quiet, her hands folded in her lap, but saw her pulse beating rapidly in her throat. I loved Caroline with everything I had, continued. And I will always love her. But these past 2 months with you have shown me that hearts don't have a limit. I can love Caroline's memory and still have room for new feelings, new possibilities. You've awakened something in me I thought died with Caroline, and I don't want to let that go. I don't want to let you go. Grace said, her voice trembling. You're my employer, this is complicated. Then I'll change that, said immediately. I'll hire someone else for Emma's care if that's what it takes, or I'll pay you severance for a year while we figure this out. Money isn't the issue here. The issue is whether you feel what I feel, whether there's something real between us, or if I'm imagining this connection. Grace was quiet for a long moment, looking down at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I feel it. God help me, I've been feeling it since that first night when you came home and found Emma in the sink. The way you looked at her with so much love and regret and determination to do better. You weren't the cold billionaire everyone talks about. You were just a father trying to reach his daughter. And every day since, watching you show up for Emma, watching you change and grow and become the father she needs, I've fallen a little bit more. Reached across the console, taking her hand. Then why are you trying to leave? Because I'm scared, Grace admitted, finally meeting his eyes. I'm scared this is too good to be real. I'm scared you'll wake up one day and realize you're in love with a memory, with the idea of Caroline's friend helping Caroline's daughter. I'm scared Emma will feel like I'm trying to replace her mother. I'm scared of everything. Being afraid is okay, said, echoing Emma's words. Acting afraid is okay. Not trying because you're afraid is what's bad. My 7-year-old daughter is wiser than both of us. Grace laughed, a wet sound somewhere between a sob and genuine amusement. She really is. So will you stay? Asked, squeezing her hand. Not as an employee, as an equal. Let me court you properly. Let's take this slow, figure it out together with Emma involved every step of the way. If it doesn't work, we'll know we tried. But Grace, I think it will work. I think Caroline sent you to us for a reason. Grace looked at their joined hands, then back at. I want to say yes so badly, but we need to think about Emma. We need to make sure she's really okay with this before we move forward. Then let's ask her, said. Tonight, we'll sit down together and talk to her honestly about what we're feeling, what we're considering. She's young, but she's smart. She deserves to have a voice in this. Grace nodded slowly. Okay, we ask Emma, and if she's not comfortable, we wait, we give her more time. Agreed, said. He brought Grace's hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. It was the first time he'd kissed any part of her, and the touch was electric, sending shivers through both of them. Whatever happens, we put Emma first. That evening after dinner, the three of them sat in the living room. Emma was on the couch between and Grace, sensing that something important was about to be discussed. Had been nervous all afternoon, rehearsing different ways to approach the conversation, but in the end, he decided simple honesty was best. Emma, he began, taking one of her small hands in his. Grace and I need to talk to you about something important, something that affects all of us. Emma's eyes were wide and serious. Okay. Glanced at Grace, who gave him an encouraging nod. You know how much I loved your mama, right? How much I'll always love her. Yes, Emma said. You told me, and Mama knew too. She said you loved her bigger than the whole sky. Felt his throat tighten. That's right, but something has been happening these past few weeks. Grace and I have been developing feelings for each other, feelings that are more than just friendship or gratitude. And we wanted to talk to you about it before anything changes because you're the most important person in both our lives. Emma looked between them, her expression unreadable. Held his breath, terrified he'd just broken his daughter's heart. Finally, Emma spoke. Do you love Grace, Daddy? Considered lying, softening it, but he'd promised honesty. I think I'm falling in love with her, yes. But that doesn't change how much I love your mama. It doesn't replace anything. It's just new love growing alongside the old. Emma turned to Grace. Do you love my daddy? Grace's voice was gentle but firm. I care about your daddy very much, and I love you, Emma. You've become so special to me, but I would never want to take your mama's place. No one could ever do that. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then she said something that surprised them both. I know Grace isn't trying to replace Mama. Mama is in here, she pointed to her heart. Grace is different. She's Grace. She makes Daddy smile. She makes our house feel warm. She helped me remember how to be happy. Emma looked at. Don't you want to be happy, Daddy? More than anything, said, his voice rough. But not if it makes you unhappy. Emma considered this seriously. I think Mama would want you to be happy. She used to tell me that love was like magic, that the more you used it, the more you had. She said love never runs out, it just gets bigger. She looked at Grace. If you and Daddy love each other, that's more love in our family, right? That's more magic. Grace was crying openly now. That's exactly right, sweet girl. Then I think it's good, Emma declared. But Daddy, you have to promise me something. Anything, said. Promise we'll still talk about Mama. Promise we won't forget her stories or stop baking her cookies or visiting her at the cemetery. Promise that if Grace becomes part of our family for real, Mama stays part of it too. Pulled Emma close, kissing the top of her head. I promise, Mama will always be part of our family, always. Emma seemed satisfied with this. She turned to Grace. And you have to promise too. Promise you'll keep telling me stories about Mama. Promise you won't get mad if I talk about her or if I'm sad sometimes. I promise, Grace said, taking Emma's other hand. Your mama was my friend. I want to keep her memory alive just as much as you do. Emma nodded, then surprised them both by taking their hands and placing them together, just as she had that night with the letters. Then it's settled. You can be in love, but we're all in love together, like a triangle, not a line. Everyone loves everyone. Looked at Grace over Emma's head, seeing his own amazement reflected in her expression. They'd been prepared for tears, for resistance, for having to move slowly and carefully. They hadn't been prepared for Emma's wholehearted acceptance, her wisdom that cut through their adult complications and anxieties. A triangle, repeated. I like that. Me too, Grace said, smiling through her tears. Emma yawned, the emotional day catching up with her. Can we watch a movie now? All the serious talking made me tired. They settled in together, Emma between them on the couch, a comedy playing on the large screen that none of them really watched. About halfway through, Emma fell asleep, her head on Grace's shoulder, her feet in his lap. And Grace sat in comfortable silence, not wanting to wake Emma by moving, content to simply be together. That went better than I expected, Grace whispered. She's incredible, agreed, looking at his daughter with wonder. When did she get so wise? She's been watching us, Grace said. Children see more than we think. She's been hopping for this, probably before we even realized it ourselves. Smart kid, said. He met Grace's eyes. So what now? Now we take it slow, Grace said. We go on dates, we spend time together as a family, we figure out what this is without rushing, and we keep Emma in the loop every step of the way. I can work with that, said. Then quietly, Grace, I'm going to kiss you goodnight at the end of tonight, just so you know it's coming. Grace's breath caught. Okay, she whispered back. I'll be ready. Hours later, after they'd carried Emma to bed and tucked her in, walked Grace to her room. They stood in the hallway, the apartment quiet around them, the city lights visible through distant windows. Cupped Grace's face in his hands, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. Their first kiss was gentle, tender, a question and an answer. Poured everything he was feeling into it, all the gratitude and affection and growing love that he'd been holding back for weeks. Grace kissed him back with equal tenderness, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, over his heart. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Rested his forehead against Grace's, reluctant to let her go completely. "That was worth waiting for," he murmured. "Definitely," Grace agreed, her voice shaky. "But we should still be careful. Emma gave us her blessing, but we need to make sure our relationship develops naturally, not rushed because we have her approval." "Agreed," said, though it took effort to step back to put space between them. "We date properly. Dinners out, movies, getting to know each other beyond our roles as Emma's caregivers." "And we keep communicating with Emma," Grace added. "Check in with her regularly, make sure she's still comfortable with the changes." Nodded, then smiled. Dr. Grace always thinking ahead, making plans. "Someone has to," Grace teased. "You billionaires are used to getting what you want immediately." "Not this time," said, his voice turning serious. "This time I'm willing to wait to do it right, because Grace, this isn't just want. This is need. This is the beginning of something I want to last the rest of my life." Grace's eyes shone. "One step at a time, but yes, I feel it too. This is different. This is real." They said goodnight and forced himself to walk away, to go to his empty bedroom instead of following Grace into hers. He lay awake for a long time, replaying the day, the conversation with Emma, that perfect kiss. He felt Caroline's presence, not as a weight holding him back, but as a blessing pushing him forward. She would have liked Grace, he thought. She would have approved of this second chance at happiness. The next morning brought new complications. His mother called, announcing her intention to visit for Thanksgiving, now only a few weeks away. Was a formidable woman, old money and older values, and she had never quite approved of Caroline, whom she considered too common for her son. She had been openly critical of Caroline's background and decision to marry her. After Caroline's death, had suggested more than once that should consider remarrying someone more suitable, preferably from an established family. The thought of introducing Grace to his mother, of dealing with this inevitable disapproval, filled with dread. "We'll handle it together," Grace assured him when he told her about the call. "I've dealt with difficult people before. I can deal with your mother." "You don't know my mother," said grimly. "She's going to have opinions about us, about you, about everything, and she won't keep them to herself." "Then we prepare Emma," Grace said practically. "We make sure she knows that sometimes adults say hurtful things, but that doesn't make those things true, and we present a united front. We don't let your mother drive a wedge between us." Admired her courage, even as he worried about what was coming. Had a way of cutting people down with a smile, of making her disapproval known through subtle digs and pointed observations. The thought of her subjecting Grace to that treatment made him protective in a way he hadn't felt since Caroline's funeral, when it made a comment about, "At least now can focus on business instead of that girl's fantasies." He needn't have worried about Grace, though. When arrived 3 weeks later, sweeping into the penthouse in furs and judgment, Grace met her with polite warmth that never crossed into subservience. She had dressed carefully for the occasion, professional but not dowdy, making it clear she was confident in her place in this household. "Mrs. Grace said, extending her hand. "I'm Grace, I help care for Emma." His eyebrows rose as she took in Grace's dark skin, her simple clothes, her lack of intimidation. "The nanny," she said, not a question but a dismissal. "How novel. Usually hires European women, Swedish if I remember correctly." "Grace is a certified pediatric nurse," said, his voice carrying a warning his mother chose to ignore. "She's been instrumental in Emma's recovery." Recovery sniffed. The child was indulged in her grief. All she needed was discipline and routine. Emma, who had been hiding behind, stepped forward. "Grandma, Grace is my friend. She knew Mama. She tells me stories about her." His expression softened slightly at the sight of her granddaughter, though her next words were still barbed. "Does she? How convenient. I hope she doesn't fill your head with too much nonsense about your mother. Caroline had many faults, though I suppose speaking ill of the dead is uncharitable." Felt rage surge through him, but before he could respond, Grace spoke, her voice calm but firm. "With respect, Mrs. Caroline had no faults that matter. She was kind, generous, loving, and devoted to both her husband and daughter. Those are the only qualities that count in the end. I was privileged to know her, and I consider it an honor to help Emma remember her mother's best qualities. His eyes narrowed. You're quite bold for someone in your position. I'm quite honest, Grace corrected gently. I find it serves me better than false modesty or convenient silences. For a moment, the two women stared at each other and held his breath, then, surprisingly, laughed, though it wasn't a warm sound. Well, at least you have a spine. That's more than I can say for most of the help these days. She turned to. We need to talk privately. Wanted to refuse, to keep Grace close as a buffer, but he also knew his mother well enough to know that delaying the inevitable would only make it worse. He excused himself, following to his study while Grace took Emma to her room to play. I hope you're not sleeping with the help, began without preamble once the door was closed. It's unseemly. You have a reputation to maintain. My personal life is my own business, said, keeping his voice level with effort. And Grace is not the help. She's a highly educated professional who has done more for Emma's in 2 months than all your suggestions combined. Your personal life becomes my business when it affects my granddaughter, shot back. That woman, regardless of her credentials, is the hired caregiver. Getting romantically involved with her is inappropriate and will only confuse Emma, not to mention what society will say. I don't care what society says, said, feeling his control slipping. I care about Emma's happiness, I care about my own happiness, and Grace makes us both happy. She's brought life back into this house. His expression turned calculating. You're infatuated, I understand. She's attractive in an exotic way, and she's been kind to Emma. But think practically. You're one of the wealthiest men in the country. You need someone appropriate by your side, someone who can navigate your world, who comes from the same background, who understands the responsibilities that come with your position. You mean someone like you, said flatly. Someone who values appearances over substance, money over kindness, pedigree over character. Mother, you never liked Caroline either, and she was the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm not going to make the same mistake twice by listening to your opinions on whom I should love. His face hardened. Caroline was common, pretty enough, I suppose, but she had no real breeding, no understanding of our world. She made you soft. She made you believe that love conquers all, that money doesn't matter, that feelings are more important than strategy. And look where it got you. Grieving for 3 years, your business suffering, your daughter a mess. Get out, said, his voice deadly quiet. Get out of my home, you're not welcome here anymore. His eyes widened. You're throwing me out, your own mother. You just insulted my late wife and the woman I'm falling in love with in the same breath, said. You showed no compassion for your granddaughter's grief and no respect for my choices. So yes, mother, I'm asking you to leave. When you're ready to treat the people I love with kindness and respect, you're welcome to return. Until then, stay away. For once was speechless. She gathered her purse with stiff dignity and walked to the door. Before she left, she turned back. You're making a mistake. That girl will break your heart, take your money, and leave. They always do. Grace isn't like that, said with certainty. She's nothing like the people you're used to. That's exactly why I love her. After left, stood in his study, shaking with residual anger. He'd just broken with his mother, possibly permanently. And instead of regret, he felt liberated. He'd finally stood up to her, finally put his own happiness and his daughter's ahead of outdated values and bitter judgments. He found Grace and Emma in the playroom. Grace looked up as he entered, reading his expression immediately. She's gone. Nodded. I asked her to leave. Told her she wasn't welcome back until she can treat you with respect. Grace's eyes filled with tears. You didn't have to do that. She's your mother. And you and Emma are my family, said firmly. She crossed a line, multiple lines. I won't tolerate anyone disrespecting either of you. He knelt beside Emma, who was looking worried. Grandma had to leave early, sweetheart. She and I had a disagreement. Emma's face fell. Was it about me? No, assured her, pulling her close. It was about grown-up things. Sometimes people disagree, even family. It doesn't mean we don't love each other, but it does mean we need some time apart. Emma seemed to accept this, returning to her toys. But later, after she was in bed, Grace confronted in the kitchen. What did your mother say? What was so bad that you threw her out? Hesitated, then decided Grace deserved the truth. He repeated the conversation, watching Grace's expression shift from shock to hurt to anger. She called me the help, Grace said, though it wasn't a question. Among other things, confirmed. Grace, my mother is wrong about everything. She was wrong about Caroline, she's wrong about you, and she's wrong about what constitutes an appropriate relationship. I don't care about society's opinions or what's traditionally acceptable. I care about authenticity, about real connection, about building a life with someone who makes me want to be better. That's you." Grace was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she said, "Your mother isn't entirely wrong about one thing, though. The wealth difference between us is significant. I come from nothing. I put myself through nursing school on scholarships and loans I'm still paying off. I don't know your world, your expectations, the responsibilities that come with being with someone like you." "Then we'll figure it out together," said, taking her hands. "Grace, I don't want someone who already knows my world. That world is cold and calculating and full of people like my mother. I want someone real, someone who sees me as not as a bank account or a business empire. You do that. You've always done that." "I'm scared," Grace admitted. "Your mother will make our lives difficult. Society will judge us. And I need you to really think about this. Dadding me will complicate your business relationships. People will talk. Some will disapprove. Some might even pull their investments or partnerships. Are you ready for that?" Thought about his business, his carefully cultivated relationships, his reputation. Then he thought about coming home to Grace and Emma, about the warmth and laughter that now filled his days, about the possibility of a future built on love instead of obligation. The choice was surprisingly easy. "Let them talk," he said. "Let them disapprove. I've spent my whole life building an empire, but what's the point of all that success if I'm miserable? If I'm alone, you and Emma, you're what matters. Everything else is just noise." Grace smiled through her tears. "You really mean that?" "Every word," confirmed. He pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "We're in this together, Grace. Whatever comes, we face it as a team. Me, you, and Emma. That's our triangle, remember." Grace laughed, the sound watery but genuine. "Our triangle, I like that." They stood together in the kitchen, holding each other while the city hummed below. They both knew challenges lay ahead, that disapproval was likely just the beginning of the obstacles they'd face. But they also knew something else, something more important. They had each other. They had the weeks following's dramatic exit brought both challenges and unexpected joy. Stood by his decision to distance himself from his mother, though he received several strongly worded letters and calls from other family members urging him to reconsider. His younger sister, Jennifer, was particularly vocal, accusing him of abandoning family for inappropriate attachments. Weathered these storms with Grace by his side, their relationship growing stronger with each obstacle they faced together. Emma continued to thrive, blossoming into a confident, articulate child who spoke freely about both her mother's memory and her hopes for the future. She had started calling Grace by her first name with a familiarity that spoke of deep affection, though she made it clear that Grace wasn't replacing her mother, just adding to their family in a different way. The three of them fell into comfortable routines: weekend outings to museums and parks, weeknight dinners around the kitchen island instead of the formal dining room, and bedtime stories that featured both Caroline's adventures and new tales Grace would invent on the spot. Officially hired a part-time housekeeper and assistant to handle the day-to-day operations of the household, making it clear that Grace was no longer an employee but his partner in raising Emma. This transition wasn't without its awkward moments. Grace struggled with stepping back from the household management she'd been handling, feeling guilty about the housekeeper taking on tasks she'd considered her responsibility. Had to repeatedly remind her that she wasn't hired help, that she had every right to simply be present as family rather than constantly working. Their first real date came in mid-December, arranged for Emma to have a sleepover at her friend's house, the first time she'd spent a night away from home since Caroline's death. Grace had been nervous about Emma's ability to handle it, but the little girl had been excited, practically bouncing as she packed her overnight bag with her mother waiting in the lobby. Once Emma was safely delivered to her friend's apartment across town, and Grace stood in the suddenly quiet penthouse, looking at each other with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. "So," said, straightening his tie. He dressed carefully in a dark suit, while Grace wore a simple but elegant black dress that made his mouth go dry. "Ready for our proper first date." "Where are we going?" Grace asked, still uncertain about the plans had refused to reveal. "It's a surprise," said, offering his arm. "Trust me." Grace hesitated only a moment before taking his arm. "I trust you." They took the private elevator down to the garage, where his driver waited with the Range Rover. But instead of climbing into the back seat, opened the driver's door and gestured for the driver to take the evening off. He helped Grace into the passenger seat, then settled behind the wheel himself. "You're driving?" Grace asked, surprised. "When was the last time you drove yourself anywhere?" "The day I met you," admitted, pulling out of the garage. "That night I came home early from Singapore. I've been using drivers for so long, I'd forgotten how much I used to enjoy it. Caroline and I used to take drives out to the Connecticut house every weekend. She'd complain about my driving, but she'd also reach over and hold my hand the whole way." Grace was quiet and worried he'd said too much, brought up Caroline at an inappropriate moment. But then Grace reached across the console and took his hand, just as Caroline used to do, and felt his heart expand with the rightness of it. They drove across the Brooklyn Bridge as the sun set, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the December darkness. Navigated through neighborhoods Grace had never seen, finally pulling up in front of a small restaurant in Gardens, one of Brooklyn's charming Italian enclaves. The restaurant was tiny, no more than a dozen tables, with warm lighting and the smell of garlic and fresh bread wafting from the kitchen. "This place isn't fancy," said, suddenly uncertain. "But Caroline and I came here on our first anniversary. The owner makes everything from scratch. No pretension, no fanfare, just good food and good company. I wanted to share it with you." Grace looked at the restaurant, then at her eyes shining. "It's perfect. Thank you for sharing this with me." Himself greeted them at the door, his weathered face breaking into a huge smile when he recognized. "It has been too long, and who is this beautiful lady?" "This is Grace. Grace runs the best Italian restaurant in all of New York, though don't tell the others I said that." "Your secret is safe with me," said with a wink. He led them to a corner table, the same one and Caroline had always requested. Saw Grace notice the small memorial card still tucked into the corner of a picture frame on the wall, a photo of with Caroline, both of them laughing. Had loved Caroline, had mourned her death alongside. "She would be happy you are here," said quietly to, nodding toward Grace. "She would not want you to be alone. Mrs. Caroline, she always said life was too short for sadness." Dinner was extraordinary, course after course of homemade pasta, fresh vegetables, and wine from private reserve. But more than the food, it was the conversation that made the evening special. Without Emma as a buffer, without the constant awareness of their roles as caregivers, and Grace talked as themselves, two people getting to know each other beyond the circumstances that had brought them together. Grace told about her childhood in Virginia, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat. She spoke about the challenges of being a black woman in nursing school, the microaggressions and outright racism she'd faced, and the determination that had pushed her through despite it all. She talked about her mother, who had passed away from breast cancer just before Grace met Caroline, and how Caroline's kindness had come at a moment when Grace felt most alone in the world. "Caroline saw me crying in the kitchen one morning," Grace said, her fingers playing with the stem of her wine glass. "It was the anniversary of my mother's death, and I thought I'd hidden it well, but Caroline noticed. She sat with me for 2 hours while I cried and talked about my mom. She didn't offer platitudes or tell me to be strong. She just listened, and then she told me about losing her own father when she was young. She made me feel less alone." Felt his throat tighten. "I didn't know that. She never told me about sitting with you." "That was Caroline," Grace said softly. "She did kind things without needing recognition. She helped me with my tuition, but she made me promise not to tell anyone, not even you. She said it wasn't charity. It was an investment in a future nurse who would save lives. She said my mother would be proud of me, and I needed to honor her sacrifice by finishing my degree." "She was right," said. "Your mother would be incredibly proud. And Grace, I'm proud too, of what you've accomplished, of the person you are. You could have taken the easy way out so many times, but you didn't. You fought for your education, your career, and then you fought for Emma when she needed someone. That takes real courage." Grace blushed, unused to such direct praise. "I just did what felt right." "That's what makes it courageous," countered. "Doing the right thing, even when it's hard, even when easier options exist." They talked about life too. He opened up about his difficult relationship with his mother, about growing up with enormous wealth but very little warmth. He spoke about how Caroline had been his escape from that cold world, how she'd taught him that success meant nothing without someone to share it with. He admitted his failures as a father after Caroline's death, how he'd hidden in work because grief felt too overwhelming to face head-on. "I was a coward," said bluntly. "I left Emma to deal with her grief alone because I couldn't handle my own. If you hadn't come along when you did, I don't know what would have happened. I might have lost her completely, not to death, but to the distance I was creating between us." "But you didn't," Grace pointed out. When the moment came when you saw Emma laughing in that sink, you chose to step up. You chose to be present. That's not cowardice, that's bravery. Inspired by you, said, reaching across the table to take her hand. Everything good that's happened these past few months is because you had the courage to come into our lives and shake us out of our grief. They lingered over dessert, neither wanting the evening to end. Brought out his special tiramisu, the same recipe he'd made for Caroline, and felt Caroline's presence not as a shadow but as a blessing. He imagined her smiling at them, happy that he'd found someone who could make him feel alive again. As they drove home, Grace's head resting against his shoulder felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. This was right. Grace was right. The timing, the circumstances, all of it had aligned in a way that felt almost magical. Back at the penthouse, they stood in the living room, suddenly shy with each other. The apartment felt too big, too quiet without Emma's presence. Poured them each a glass of wine, and they settled on the couch, the city spread out below them like a carpet of stars. "Thank you for tonight," Grace said. "For sharings with me, for telling me about Caroline. I know it's not easy for you to open up about her." "It's getting easier," admitted. "Especially with you. You knew her, you loved her, you understand what I lost. But Grace, I need you to know something. What I feel for you isn't about replacing Caroline. It's not about finding a substitute mother for Emma. This is separate, distinct, its own thing. I'm falling in love with you, Grace, for who you are, not for who you remind me of or what role you fill." Grace set down her wine glass, turning to face him fully. "I need to know you've really thought this through, that you understand what you're signing up for. I'm not Caroline. I don't come from money or understand your world. I'm going to make mistakes, say the wrong things at business dinners, not know which fork to use at fancy events. Your friends and family are going to judge you for being with me. Your mother already has." "Let them judge," said firmly. "Grace, I've lived in that world my whole life. I know exactly how shallow and cruel it can be. Caroline didn't fit in either, and I loved her all the more for it. I don't want someone who knows which fork to use. I want someone real, someone who challenges me, someone who makes me want to be better. I want you." Grace searched his face, looking for doubt or hesitation. Finding none, she leaned forward and kissed him. This kiss was different from their first, deeper and more urgent, speaking of needs and desires they'd been holding back. Pulled her closer, his hands in her hair, and Grace responded with equal passion, years of loneliness and longing pouring into the kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Grace rested her forehead against. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I've been fighting it, telling myself it's too soon, too complicated, too impossible, but I can't fight it anymore. You've gotten under my skin." "Good," said, kissing her again, softer this time, "because I plan to stay there." They stayed on the couch for hours, talking and kissing and simply being together. They discussed their fears about moving forward, their hopes for the future, and practical considerations like how to explain their relationship to Emma's school and business associates. They agreed to take things slowly, to let Emma set the pace, to continue living as they had been for now while their relationship developed naturally. It was past midnight when Grace finally stood to go to her room, walked her to her door, reluctant to let her go. "Stay with me," he said impulsively, then quickly added, "just to sleep. I'm not ready for more yet, and I don't think you are either. But I don't want to be alone tonight. I want to fall asleep with you beside me and wake up knowing this is real." Grace considered for a long moment, then nodded. "Just to sleep," she confirmed. "We go slow, remember." They changed in separate rooms, Grace emerging in simple pajamas while wore sweatpants and a t-shirt. It felt strange and wonderful, domestic and intimate all at once. They climbed into his massive bed, and after a moment of awkwardness, Grace settled against his chest, his arm around her shoulders. "This is nice," Grace murmured, her breath warm against his neck. "Very nice," agreed. He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling her warmth against him. They talked quietly about nothing important, comfortable in each other's presence, until Grace's breathing evened out and knew she'd fallen asleep. He lay awake a while longer, holding her, marveling at the turn his life had taken. 4 months ago, he'd been a shell of a man, going through the motions, failing his daughter, drowning in unprocessed grief. Now he was lying in bed with a woman he was falling in love with, his daughter was thriving, and the future looked bright for the first time since Caroline's death. "Thank you," he whispered into the darkness, unsure if he was talking to Caroline or to fate or to God. "Thank you for sending her to us." Morning came with pale winter sunlight streaming through the windows. Woke to find Grace already awake, watching him with a soft smile. "Morning," she said. "Morning," replied, pulling her closer. "Sleep well." "Better than I have in years," Grace admitted. "Your bed is ridiculously comfortable." "You're welcome to share at any time," said, then paused. "Is that too forward, too fast?" Grace laughed. "Maybe a little, but I appreciate the sentiment." She glanced at the clock. "We should get up. We need to pick up Emma in a few hours." They made breakfast together, moving around the kitchen in easy synchronization. Kept finding excuses to touch Grace, brushing past her to reach for the coffee, catching her hand as she walked by, stealing kisses over the pancake batter. Grace laughed and returned his affection, the awkwardness of new relationships melting away in the warmth of their connection. When they picked up Emma, she immediately noticed something different. "You're both glowing," she announced in the car on the way home. "Did something happen?" And Grace exchanged glances. "We had a nice dinner," said carefully, "and we talked about our relationship, about what it means, where it might go." Emma leaned forward from the back seat, her eyes bright with interest. And we decided we're officially together," Grace said, turning to smile at Emma. "Your dad is my boyfriend, if that's okay with you." Emma squealed, an undignified sound of pure joy. "Yes, I've been hoping you'd figure it out. Mom asked if you two were dating, and I said not yet, but I hoped you would be soon." Laughed, relieved and amused by Emma's enthusiasm. "So you approve?" "Totally approve," Emma said seriously. "Can Grace move into your room now? It's silly for her to sleep in the staff room when she's not staff anymore." "Emma," Grace said, blushing, "that's a very personal question." "But it makes sense," Emma insisted. "That's what people do when they're together, right? They share a room." Tried to keep his face straight. "Emma, relationships move at different speeds. Grace and I are taking things slow. We want to make sure everything feels right before making big changes." Emma looked skeptical. Mom said when adults say they're taking it slow, it means they're being boring and overthinking things. "Mom sounds very wise," Grace said, shooting an amused look. "But sometimes taking it slow means making sure everyone is comfortable and happy with the changes." Emma seemed to accept this, launching into a detailed description of her sleepover complete with accounts of the movies they'd watched and the elaborate fort they'd built in 's room. But noticed her eyes kept darting between him and Grace, a satisfied smile on her young face, as if she'd personally orchestrated their relationship. The rest of December passed in a blur of holiday preparations. Emma insisted on decorating for Christmas properly, which meant 3 separate shopping trips for decorations and hours spent hanging ornaments while Christmas music played. Dug out Caroline's collection of holiday decorations, stored away since her death, and he and Grace and Emma spent an afternoon going through them, sharing memories attached to each ornament. "Mama and I made this one," Emma said, holding up a slightly lopsided clay angel with Caroline's name and date painted on the back. "She said angels watch over us, especially when we need them most." "Then we'll put it at the very top of the tree," said, his voice thick, "where she can watch over all of us." Christmas Eve arrived with unseasonable warmth, rain instead of snow tapping against the windows. His business associates had been understanding about his reduced travel schedule, though a few partnerships had indeed cooled once word got out about his relationship with his daughter's former caregiver. Found he didn't care. The business would survive. His happiness, Emma's happiness, that's what mattered. That evening, the 3 of them sat around the Christmas tree, the lights twinkling in the darkness. Emma opened her presents with appropriate enthusiasm, delighted with the art supplies and books and the telescope had bought for their planned stargazing trips. Grace had been hesitant to accept gifts, but had insisted, presenting her with a delicate necklace that had belonged to Caroline. "I found this when I was going through Caroline's jewelry," explained as Grace stared at the necklace with tears in her eyes. "It was one of her favorites. I thought you should have it, not as a replacement for her, but as a connection to her memory. She would want you to have it." Grace's hands shook as she fastened the necklace. "Are you sure? This is so personal." "I'm sure," said. "You've given us so much, Grace. You've given me back my daughter, given Emma her smile, and given me a reason to believe in happiness again. This necklace is just a small token of what you mean to us." Emma had crawled into Grace's lap, and the 3 of them sat there together, surrounded by wrapping paper and ribbon, the tree lights reflecting in their eyes. Felt Caroline's presence stronger than he had in months, not sad but celebratory, as if she was there with them, blessing this new family they were building from the pieces of the old. "I have something for you too," Grace said to, pulling a small wrapped box from behind the tree. It's not expensive, but I thought you might like it. Unwrapped the box to find a leather-bound journal, elegant and simple. It's beautiful, he said, confused about its significance. Open it, Grace urged. Open the journal to find the first page inscribed in Grace's elegant handwriting. For a place to record your thoughts, your memories of Caroline, your dreams for the future, and your love for Emma. Every person's story deserves to be written. I hope you'll write yours. Felt tears sting his eyes. Grace, this is perfect, thank you. I thought maybe writing might help, Grace said softly. Sometimes putting feelings on paper makes them easier to process. And someday, Emma might want to read about this time, about how her father learned to live again after loss. Pulled Grace close, kissing her with Emma between them, giggling and making exaggerated gagging sounds. You're both mushy, Emma declared, but I like it. Mushy is good. Mushy is very good, agreed. Later, after Emma was asleep with her new stuffed panda clutched in her arms, and Grace sat by the fireplace, sipping hot chocolate and watching the flames dance. Grace had officially moved most of her things into this room, though she'd kept her old room as a private space for when she needed time alone. They were learning to balance togetherness with independence, to give each other space while also sharing their lives. This was a good Christmas, Grace said, leaning against a shoulder. The best I've had in years, agreed, though I have to admit I'm a bit nervous about New Year's. Grace sat up, looking at him with concern. Why? I thought I'd host a party, said. Nothing huge, just some close friends and business associates. I want to introduce you properly as my girlfriend, not as Emma's caregiver. Make it official to everyone who matters in my life. Grace was quiet for a moment. And you think they'll judge us? Some will, admitted. But Grace, I don't care about their judgment. I care about you feeling comfortable and supported. I want you to know that I'm proud to be with you, that I'm not hiding our relationship or treating it as something shameful. You deserve to be acknowledged as the important person you are in my life. Grace smiled, though her eyes were troubled. Your mother will hear about it. Probably, agreed. But she's not invited. And if she shows up anyway, security has instructions to turn her away. I meant what I said about protecting you from her toxicity. You're really serious about this, Grace said, wonder in her voice. About us, about facing down your entire world for me. Deadly serious, confirmed. He took both her hands in his. Grace, I know we've only been officially together for a few weeks. I know this is fast, maybe too fast, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You're it for me. You're my second chance, my new beginning, my future, and I want everyone to know it. Grace leaned forward, kissing him deeply. Then let's do it, she said when they finally broke apart. Let's host your party. Let's tell the world. I'm tired of hiding, of worrying what people think. If they can't see how lucky you are to have me, that's their problem. Laughed, delighted by her confidence. There's the Grace I know, strong and fierce and unwilling to back down. You bring it out in me, Grace said. You make me feel like I can face anything. We'll face it together, promised. Always together. They sat by the fire until it burned low, talking about the party, about the future, about all the possibilities opening up before them. Emma was healing, their relationship was deepening, and the future that had looked so bleak just 4 months ago now glowed with promise. There would be challenges ahead, new. Disapproving relatives, judgmental associates, the inevitable complications of blending lives from such different backgrounds. But with Grace beside him and Emma's blessing warming them both, felt ready to face whatever came. They were a New Year's party loomed large in his mind as December drew to a close. He'd organized dozens of business events over the years, but none had felt as significant as this one. This wasn't just a social gathering. It was a statement, a public declaration of the new life he was building with Grace and Emma at its center. Grace threw herself into party preparations with characteristic determination, insisting on helping despite protests that she was a guest, not staff. They compromised, with Grace working alongside the caterers and event planners as an equal partner, making decisions about menu and guest flow. Emma contributed her own ideas, suggesting fairy lights and declaring that every good party needed cookies, specifically Caroline's chocolate chip recipe. 3 days before the party, received an unexpected visitor at his office. His secretary buzzed him, her voice uncertain. "Mister, your sister is here. She says it's urgent." Stiffened, Jennifer hadn't spoken to him since he'd thrown their mother out, her silence a clear indication of whose side she'd taken. Send her in, he said, bracing himself for another confrontation. Jennifer swept into his office in designer clothes and barely concealed fury. At 38, she was 4 years younger than and had inherited their mother's sharp features and sharper tongue. She'd married well, to a banker with old money and older ideas, and prided herself on being a pillar of Manhattan society. "You've lost your mind," she announced without preamble, standing in front of his desk with her arms crossed. "Throwing Mother out was bad enough, but now I hear you're planning a party to introduce your new girlfriend, some black woman who used to work for you. Have you completely forgotten who you are?" Stood slowly, his expression hardening. "I know exactly who I am. The question is, do you know who you've become? When did you turn into Mother's clone, Jennifer? You used to be kind, open-minded. You loved Caroline." "I did love Caroline," Jennifer snapped. "She was your wife, the mother of your child. This is different. This woman is the help. She's after your money. Grace has never asked me for a penny beyond her salary, which she earned by doing more for Emma in 2 months than anyone else managed in 3 years," said, his voice dangerously quiet. "She's a certified pediatric nurse with her own career and ambitions. She doesn't need my money." Jennifer's expression turned calculating. "Then why is she with you? Come on, be realistic. You're one of the richest men in the country. You're handsome, powerful, and grieving. She saw an opportunity and she took it. I'm sure she's lovely, but let's not pretend this is some fairy tale romance." Came around his desk, getting close enough to see the uncertainty beneath his sister's confident facade. "You want to know why Grace is with me? Because I make her laugh. Because we understand each other's grief. Because I see her, really see her, not as the help or as some opportunity, but as a remarkable woman who's been through hell and came out kind. Because she makes me want to be better, to do better, to show up for my daughter in ways I'd forgotten how to do. That's why she's with me. And Jennifer, if you can't understand that, if you become so warped by Mother's toxic values that you can't see what's right in front of you, then I don't want you at my party and I don't want you in my life." Jennifer's face flushed. "You'd choose her over your own family." "I'd choose happiness over misery," corrected. "I'd choose love over judgment. And yes, if that means losing relationships with people who can't support my choices, then that's a price I'm willing to pay. Emma is thriving. I'm happier than I've been in years, and Grace is a huge part of that. You can either accept it and be part of our lives, or you can follow Mother's example and stay away. Your choice." For a moment, Jennifer just stared at him. Then, unexpectedly, her shoulders sagged and she sank into one of the chairs facing his desk. "I'm scared," she said quietly, all the bluster gone from her voice. "When Caroline died, you fell apart. Emma fell apart. I watched you both drowning in grief, and I didn't know how to help. And now this woman appears, and suddenly everything's better. It feels too fast. It feels like you're running from your grief instead of processing it." His anger softened slightly. He sat in the chair next to Jennifer, not behind his desk anymore. "I'm not running from grief," he said more gently. "I'm learning to live with it. There's a difference. Grace didn't make me forget Caroline. She helped me remember her without the remembering destroying me. She gave Emma permission to talk about her mother, to keep Caroline's memory alive instead of treating it like something too painful to touch. And yes, I've developed feelings for Grace, but those feelings don't erase what I felt for Caroline. The heart doesn't work that way." Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. "Mother says terrible things about her, about Grace, racist things, honestly." "I know," said. "That's one of the reasons I asked her to leave. I won't tolerate that kind of hatred in my home or around Emma." "Emma really likes her?" Jennifer asked. "This Grace?" "Emma loves her," confirmed. "She's come alive again, Jennifer. She's laughing, talking, making friends. She's processing her grief in healthy ways instead of bottling it up. And a lot of that is because Grace knew how to reach her when I didn't." Jennifer finally looked at him directly. "I want to meet her, Grace, before the party. I want to see for myself what kind of woman she is, why you're willing to break with Mother for her." Considered this carefully. "You can meet her, but Jennifer, I need you to promise you'll be respectful. No interrogations, no passive-aggressive comments, no testing her. She's going to be nervous enough without you playing mind games." "I promise," Jennifer said. "I just want to understand, and maybe see if there's a way to fix things between you and Mother. Family shouldn't be broken like this." "Mother broke the family," said firmly. "Not me. She chose her prejudices over her son's happiness. I'm not going to apologize for that or try to fix it. If she wants to reconcile, she needs to change, to accept Grace and respect my choices. Until then, the door remains closed." Jennifer nodded slowly. "All right, when can I meet Grace?" They arranged for Jennifer to come to the penthouse the next evening. Warned Grace about the visit, expecting her to be nervous, but instead she seemed almost eager. "I want to meet your sister," Grace said. "If we're going to build a life together, I need to face your family eventually. Might as well start now." Emma was less enthusiastic. "Is she mean like Grandma?" she asked suspiciously when told her about the visit. "I hope not," said honestly. "But we'll see. Remember, Emma, people can surprise us. Sometimes they're better than we expect, and sometimes they're worse. We won't know until we give them a chance." Jennifer arrived promptly at 7, dressed more casually than usual, which took as a good sign. Emma hung back, watching warily, while Grace greeted Jennifer with warm politeness. "It's nice to meet you, Jennifer," Grace said, extending her hand. "Has told me a lot about you." Jennifer shook Grace's hand, her expression assessing. "All good things, I hope." "Mostly good," Grace said with a slight smile. "He mentioned you're quite protective of him and Emma." "I am," Jennifer confirmed. She looked at Emma, who was still hiding partially behind. "Hello, Emma, remember me? I'm your Aunt Jennifer." Emma nodded but didn't speak. Jennifer's face fell slightly and realized his sister was hurt by Emma's coldness. "Emma's had a lot of strangers in her life recently," Grace said gently. "It takes her time to warm up to people. Maybe if you visited more often, she'd remember you better." The comment was delivered without malice, but saw Jennifer flinch at the implication. She turned back to Grace, her expression more guarded. "I've been busy." "Of course," Grace said. "We all are, but family makes time for family, don't they?" Jennifer stared at Grace for a long moment, then surprised them all by laughing. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Grace asked, genuinely curious. "Someone more submissive, I suppose. Someone who would defer to me because of my family connection. You're not like that at all." "Should I be?" Grace countered. "And I are equals. I'm not intimidated by money or social position, Jennifer. I've worked too hard and overcome too much to let anyone make me feel lesser." "Good," Jennifer said, and she seemed to mean it. "Deserves someone with a spine. Caroline had one. She stood up to Mother more than once, which I admired even if I never said so." The mention of Caroline could have been awkward, but Grace nodded approvingly. "Caroline sounds like she was wonderful. I only knew her briefly, but she made a lasting impression. She's part of why I'm here, actually. She helped me when I needed it, and I wanted to return that kindness by helping her daughter." Jennifer's expression softened further. "So you knew Caroline?" "I worked at the Connecticut house for 2 years," Grace explained. "Caroline was kind to all of us on staff, but she took a special interest in me when she learned I was putting myself through nursing school. She helped with my tuition. I'll never forget that generosity." Jennifer sat down slowly on the couch, looking between Grace and, "Mother said you were after some money, but you're already established in your career. You don't need financial help." "I don't," Grace confirmed. "I'm with because he's a good man, a devoted father, and someone I've come to care about deeply. The money is his, not mine, and I'm fine with that. I have my own savings, my own career, my own life. Is a part of that life, but he's not all of it." "She teaches at the Children's Hospital 2 days a week," Emma piped up, finally emerging from behind. "She helps sick kids feel better. She's really good at it." "Is that so?" Jennifer asked, looking at Emma with surprise. "You seem quite proud of Grace." "I am," Emma said firmly. "Grace is family. She takes care of us and makes Daddy smile. She tells me stories about Mama and doesn't get sad when I cry, and she makes the best cookies." Jennifer's eyes were suspiciously bright. "That's quite an endorsement." Dinner was less awkward than had feared. Jennifer seemed genuinely interested in getting to know Grace, asking about her work at the hospital, her educational background, her interests outside of caregiving. Grace answered honestly, not trying to impress or win Jennifer over, just being herself. By the time dessert was served, the conversation had become almost easy, with Emma chattering away about her upcoming school project and Jennifer actually listening with interest. As Jennifer prepared to leave, she pulled aside while Grace was helping Emma get ready for bed. "I like her," Jennifer said simply. "She's smart, confident, and clearly devoted to Emma. I was wrong to judge before meeting her. I'm sorry." Felt tension he'd been carrying drain away. "Thank you, that means a lot." But Jennifer continued, her voice more serious. "You need to prepare yourself. The party is going to be difficult. People are going to talk, make assumptions, say awful things. Some of your business associates won't understand. And Mother, If she hears about this party, and she will, she's going to do something. I don't know what, but I know my mother. She won't take this lying down. Let her try, said firmly. Grace and I have discussed this. We know what we're walking into, but we're not going to hide or apologize for our relationship. If people can't accept it, that's their problem. Jennifer nodded. Then I'll be there, at the party, and I'll make it clear to anyone who asks that I support you completely. It's the least I can do after being such a judgmental fool. Hugged his sister, relief flooding through him. Thank you, Jennifer. Having you there means everything. The next 2 days passed in a whirlwind of final preparations. The penthouse was transformed into an elegant party space, with caterers arriving early to set up stations throughout the main floor. Emma had insisted on helping, arranging flowers and taste-testing every dessert option. She wore a new dress for the occasion, deep purple like Caroline's favorite color, and declared herself the official hostess alongside her father and Grace. Grace had agonized over what to wear, trying on and rejecting a dozen dresses before finally settling on a simple but stunning emerald green gown that made her dark skin glow. Couldn't take his eyes off her as she got ready, and when she finally emerged fully dressed, jewelry in place and confidence radiating from her, he felt his breath catch. You're beautiful, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I'm terrified, Grace admitted, though she smiled as she said it. But I'm ready, we're doing this. We're doing this, agreed, taking her hand. Guests began arriving at 8, a carefully curated mix of business associates, old friends, and a few family members Jennifer had convinced to come despite the controversial circumstances. Noticed the curious glances, the whispers behind raised hands, but he ignored them all. Grace was beside him, her hand in his, and Emma was darting between guests with the confidence of a child who knew she was loved and safe. The first hour passed smoothly. Most guests were polite, if reserved, offering congratulations on the relationship with varying degrees of sincerity. His business partner, David, was enthusiastically supportive, having met Grace earlier and been charmed by her intelligence and warmth. He spent 20 minutes talking to her about healthcare innovations, genuinely interested in her perspective as a working nurse. But not everyone was so accepting. His former brother-in-law, Caroline's brother Robert, cornered him in the study around 10 o'clock. Robert was red-faced with anger and possibly too much champagne. How could you? Robert demanded without preamble. Caroline's barely been gone 3 years and you're parading around with her former maid. It's disrespectful, it's disgusting. Felt his temper rise but forced himself to remain calm. Grace was not Caroline's maid. She was a member of the household staff studying for her nursing degree, and what I do with my personal life is no longer your concern, Robert. You're not family anymore. I'm Emma's uncle, Robert shot back, and I care about what kind of example you're setting for her. What are you teaching her, that people are replaceable, that her mother didn't matter? I'm teaching her that love isn't finite, said, his voice hard. That honoring someone's memory doesn't mean shutting yourself off from future happiness. Caroline would want Emma to see healthy relationships, to understand that life continues even after loss. Grace helps Emma remember Caroline every single day. She's done more to preserve Caroline's memory than you ever did. Robert's face turned even redder. You're making a mistake. And when this blows up in your face, when this woman shows her true colors and takes you for everything you're worth, don't come crying to me. I won't, said coldly. In fact, Robert, I think you should leave. You're not welcome in my home. Fine, Robert spat. But know this, Caroline's entire family thinks you've dishonored her memory. We're all disgusted by this. Then I guess Caroline married into the wrong family, said. Because she was the kindest, most open-hearted person I knew, and she would never have begrudged me finding happiness again. If you can't see that, if you're so small-minded that you judge me for moving forward, then you never understood her at all. Robert stormed out and took a moment to compose himself before returning to the party. Grace found him immediately, reading the tension in his face. What happened? She asked quietly. Robert happened, said. Caroline's brother, he's angry about us, said some terrible things. I asked him to leave. Grace's expression was sad but not surprised. I'm sorry. I know this is hard, dealing with everyone's judgment. It doesn't matter, said firmly, pulling her close. His opinion doesn't change how I feel about you. Nothing anyone says tonight will change that. Grace kissed his cheek. I know, but I hate that you're losing relationships because of me. I'm not losing anything that matters, assured her. I'm gaining something precious. You're worth more than all of them combined. The party continued and gradually began to relax. More guests than he'd expected were supportive, genuinely happy to see him moving forward with his life. Old friends from college reminisced with grace about their own unconventional relationships, sharing stories of family disapproval that eventually turned to acceptance. Emma charmed everyone, talking proudly about her grace and how happy their family was now. At midnight, as the party began to wind down, called for everyone's attention. The room quieted, all eyes turning to him as he stood with Grace beside him, Emma in front of them. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight," began, his voice carrying across the room. "The past few years have been the hardest of my life. When Caroline died, I lost my way. I threw myself into work and neglected the most important person in my life, my daughter. I was drowning and I didn't even realize it." He felt Grace squeeze his hand, lending him strength. But then Grace came into our lives. She saw what I couldn't see, that Emma needed permission to grieve, to remember her mother, to talk about her without fear. Grace gave Emma that gift, and in doing so, she gave me the gift of seeing my daughter truly smile again. She brought light back into our home. Looked at Grace, his heart in his eyes. "I didn't expect to fall in love again. I thought that part of my life was over. But Grace taught me that hearts don't have limits, that loving someone new doesn't diminish the love I'll always have for Caroline. Caroline would want me to be happy. She'd want Emma to grow up in a home filled with love and laughter, and that's what Grace has given us." He turned back to the crowd. "I know some of you don't understand. I know some of you judge me for moving on, for being with someone you consider inappropriate because of her background or her former role in my household. But I'm asking you to look past those superficial concerns and see what I see. A remarkable woman who chose to come into our lives not for money or status, but out of loyalty to Caroline's memory and love for a hurting child." Emma tugged on his jacket, and he bent down so she could whisper in his ear. He smiled and straightened. "Emma wants me to tell you that Grace is not replacing her mother. No one could ever do that. But Grace is building something new with us, a different kind of family that honors the past while embracing the future. And we hope you'll all support us as we continue this journey together." There was a moment of silence, and then Jennifer started clapping. David joined her, then others, until the entire room was applauding. Not everyone noticed. A few guests stood with arms crossed, clearly disapproving, but enough people showed their support that felt validated, accepted, understood. Grace was crying and pulled her close, kissing her in front of everyone. Emma cheered and laughter rippled through the crowd. It was a perfect moment, exactly what it hoped for. But perfect moments never last forever. As the crowd's applause died down and conversations resumed, the elevator chimed. The doors opened and stepped out, followed by two men didn't recognize. The room fell silent, surveyed the scene with cold eyes, taking in the decorations, the guests, and finally settling her gaze on Grace. "How touching," said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "A pretty speech about love conquering all, but I'm afraid I'm here to bring everyone back to reality." She gestured to the men beside her. "This is James, a private investigator, and this is Peter, an attorney. They've uncovered some very interesting information about Miss." Felt ice spread through his veins. "Mother, you need to leave now." "Not until everyone knows the truth," continued, pulling papers from her designer handbag. "You see, Grace isn't quite who she claims to be. Yes, she worked at your Connecticut estate. Yes, she has a nursing degree. But what she conveniently forgot to mention is that she has a criminal record." Grace had gone completely still beside, her face drained of color, looked at her, seeing shock and something else in her expression. Fear. "That's a lie," said, but his voice lacked conviction. Grace's reaction had told him everything. "It's not," said triumphantly. "When Grace was 19, she was arrested for shoplifting. She stole medication from the pharmacy where she worked to help her sick mother. The charges were eventually dropped as part of a first-time offender program, but the arrest remains on her record. She lied on her employment application to your household staff, claiming no criminal history. That's fraud. This woman is a criminal and a liar, and you've welcomed her into your home around your daughter." The room erupted in whispers. Felt the world tilting, not because of what his mother had revealed, but because of the devastation on Grace's face. She pulled away from him, her eyes welling with tears. "I can explain," she whispered. "You don't have to," started, but Grace shook her head. "Yes, I do." She turned to face the room, her voice shaking but clear. "What says is true. When I was 19, my mother was dying of breast cancer. We had no insurance, no money for her medications. I worked at a pharmacy and I stole pain medication for her. I was caught, arrested, and charged with theft. The charges were dropped after I completed a diversion program and paid restitution, but yes, I was arrested. She looked at tears streaming down her face. When I applied to work at your estate, I checked no on the criminal history question because technically the charges were expunged. But I should have explained, should have been honest about what happened. I was ashamed. I was scared no one would hire me if they knew, so I hid it. Why didn't you tell me? Asked quietly. When we got involved, why didn't you tell me then? Because I was terrified you'd look at me differently, Grace sobbed. That you'd see me as a criminal instead of who I am now. I was going to tell you, I swear. I just needed to find the right time, the right words. I never imagined your mother would dig into my past like this. Smiled coldly. I did what any responsible mother would do. I protected my son from a gold digger and a liar. This woman deceived you from the very beginning. She's been playing you, using Emma to get to your money. You need to send her away before she does any more damage. Looked at his mother at her satisfied expression and felt something break inside him. Not his love for Grace, but his last connection to the woman who had given him life. Get out, he said, his voice flat and cold. Get out of my home and don't ever come back. You're dead to me. Smile faltered. I'm trying to help you. You're trying to destroy my happiness, corrected. You hired investigators to dig up dirt on the woman I love. You crashed my party specifically to humiliate Grace in front of my friends and colleagues. You're cruel, mother, cruel and hateful and completely incapable of understanding what really matters in life. I never want to see you again. You'll regret this, warned. When she leaves you, when she takes your money and breaks Emma's heart, you'll wish you'd listened to me. The only regret I have is not cutting you out of my life sooner, said. Security will escort you out. He addressed the investigator and attorney. If you ever work for my mother again in any capacity involving my family, I will sue you both for harassment. Now leave. The three of them left, his face twisted with fury, and turned back to his guests. I apologize for the interruption, but since my mother was kind enough to air Grace's past, let me add some context. Grace was 19 years old, watching her mother die in excruciating pain, with no money and no help. She made a desperate choice that any loving daughter might make. She was caught, she paid her debt to society, and she's built a successful career as a nurse who now legally helps people with medication and care. What my mother sees as criminality, I see as a young woman who loved her mother enough to risk everything for her comfort. That's not a character flaw. That's devotion. He took Grace's hand, though she tried to pull away. Grace did lie on her application, yes. She should have been honest with me about her past when our relationship became personal. But I understand why she didn't. She was afraid of exactly this, of being judged not for who she is now, but for a mistake she made as a teenager. And frankly, if the worst thing about Grace is that she once stole medication for her dying mother, she's still the best person I know. He addressed the room one final time. I'm in love with Grace, not because she's perfect, but because she's real. She's made mistakes and owned them. She's overcome obstacles that would have broken most people. She's shown me and my daughter what true strength and kindness look like. And if you can't accept that, if you're going to judge her for a teenage mistake made out of love and desperation, then I don't want you in my life either. There was a long, tense silence. Then Jennifer stepped forward, walking directly to Grace. I think what you did for your mother was incredibly brave, she said clearly. Thank you for sharing your truth with us. You have my full support. David nodded agreement. We all make mistakes. What matters is how we learn from them. Grace, you're obviously a person of strong character and is lucky to have you. Others chimed in with similar sentiments. Not everyone, but enough that the tension began to ease. Saw some guests quietly leaving, clearly uncomfortable or disapproving, but he didn't care. The people who mattered, the ones worth keeping in his life, were still there. Emma had been silent through the whole confrontation, but now she ran to Grace, wrapping her arms around her waist. I don't care what Grandma says. You're good, Grace. You're the best. Grace broke down completely, sinking to her knees and holding Emma tight. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I should have told your father. I should have been honest from the start. You were scared, Emma said with heartbreaking wisdom. Mama used to say being scared is okay. It's being mean that's bad. You were never mean. You were just scared. Knelt beside them, wrapping both Grace and Emma in his arms. We're going to be okay, he promised. All three of us, this doesn't change anything. But as the party finally wound down and guests departed, knew that wasn't entirely true. Things had changed. Grace's secret was out, exposed in the worst possible way. Trust had been damaged, not destroyed, but definitely hurt. They would have to rebuild to work through this new reality together. After the last guest left and Emma was finally asleep, exhausted by the emotional evening, and Grace sat in the living room, the debris of the party surrounding them. "I should leave," Grace said quietly. "Go back to my apartment, give you space to think about all of this." "Don't you dare," said fiercely. "Grace, I'm angry that you didn't tell me. I wish you'd trusted me with your past, but I'm not angry about what you did. I understand why you stole that medication. I can't imagine watching my parent die in pain and having the power to help. What you did was illegal, yes, but it was also human. And the fact that you've spent the last 10 years building a career helping people legally shows me exactly who you are at your core." "Your mother was right about one thing," Grace said, wiping her eyes. "I lied on my application. I deceived you from the beginning." "You omitted information about an expunged arrest," corrected. "That's different from active deception. And Grace, I've done things I'm not proud of in business. I've crushed smaller companies, destroyed careers, prioritized profit over people. I've never been arrested for it, but that doesn't make it morally superior to what you did." Grace looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "You don't have to make excuses for me." "I'm not," said. "I'm putting your actions in context. You made a desperate choice out of love. I've made calculated choices out of greed, which is worse." "It's not a competition," Grace said, but she smiled slightly through her tears. "I love you," said, taking her hands. "I love you for who you are, mistakes and all. My mother tried to destroy what we have, but all she did was show me how strong our foundation really is. We can survive this, Grace. We can survive anything as long as we're honest with each other from here on out." "I promise," Grace said. "No more secrets, no more hiding." "No more secrets," agreed. They sat together in the wreckage of the evening, holding each other, knowing that harder days might still come, but confident they could face them. The party had been simultaneously a disaster and a triumph. Yes, had exposed Grace's past, but had publicly declared his love and commitment. Yes, some relationships had been damaged or lost, but the important ones had been strengthened. In the weeks that followed, and Grace worked on rebuilding complete trust. Grace told him everything about her childhood, her mother's illness, the arrest, and its aftermath. She showed him old court documents, the certificates showing the charges had been expunged, letters of recommendation from employers since then praising her integrity and character. Shared his own regrets, business decisions he wasn't proud of, ways he'd prioritized money over morals. Emma continued to be their guiding light, reminding them both that love meant accepting people completely, flaws and all. She made Grace promise to never leave, made promise to never let her go, and declared that their family was broken in all the right places. A phrase Grace had used once when explaining how Japanese art sometimes highlights cracks with gold. By Valentine's Day, knew what he wanted to do. He'd been carrying the ring in his pocket for 3 days, waiting for the perfect moment. It came on a Sunday afternoon, the three of them at the cemetery visiting Caroline's grave. They'd made it a monthly ritual, bringing flowers and sharing stories, keeping Caroline's memory alive. Emma was chattering about her latest school project while arranging fresh white roses around the headstone. Grace was listening with that patient attention she always gave Emma and watched them both, his heart full. "Grace," he said, and something in his tone made both Emma and Grace look at him. He knelt down, pulling out the ring box. "I know it's only been 6 months since we got together. I know we've faced challenges, that more will come. But I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to make this official, to give Emma the stable family she deserves, to build a future together. Grace, will you marry me?" Grace's hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Are you sure? After everything that happened, you still want this?" "Because of everything that happened," corrected. "We've seen each other at our worst and we're still here, still together, still in love. I've never been more sure of anything." Emma was jumping up and down. "Say yes, please say yes." Grace laughed through her tears, looking at Caroline's headstone as if seeking permission. Then she looked back at and smiled. "Yes," she said. 1,000 times yes." Slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple band with 3 stones representing their triangle, Grace and Emma. They stood together by Caroline's grave, newly engaged, and felt Caroline's presence like a blessing, warm and approving. "Thank you," he whispered, not sure if he was talking to Caroline or to Grace or to the universe that had brought them all together. "Thank you for this second chance." As they drove home, Emma chattering excitedly about wedding plans and whether she could be a junior bride instead of just a flower girl, reached across to take Grace's hand. She smiled at him, the afternoon sunlight catching in her engagement ring, and thought about how far they'd all come. From that first night when he'd found Emma in the sink, laughing with a stranger who would become so much more. From grief and isolation to love and family. From endings to new beginnings. Life had given them all a second chance, and was determined not to waste it. He would love Grace with everything he had, raise Emma with the presents she deserved, and honor Caroline's memory by living fully, by choosing happiness, by building the kind of family that celebrated love in all its forms. The future stretched out before them, unknown but no longer frightening. Together they could handle anything. Together they were whole. And together, with Caroline's memory blessing them and Emma's laughter leading them forward, they would build something beautiful from the broken pieces of their pasty, as Emma had said, all 3 points essential to the structure's strength. And together they could handle anything the world threw at them, Ma's blessing, and they had Caroline's memory guiding them forward. Whatever came next, they would handle it together, building a new kind of family from grief and hope and the unexpected gift of second chances. The journey ahead would not be simple, but for the first time since Caroline's death, felt ready to take that journey, with his daughter beside him and Grace's hand in his, moving forward into an unknown future that suddenly seemed bright with promise. Made a silent promise to Caroline, to Emma, and to himself. He would do better, he would be better, and he would figure out what to do about the unexpected feelings stirring in his chest every time he thought about the woman who had walked into his home and changed everything.